Hi everyone, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you, I really appreciate it. So in regard to our current political situation, if the question is, should we be optimistic or pessimistic? The first answer is probably, as always happens in life, a little bit of both. However, if we look at the big markers, we notice that despite many problems due to our current leadership, there's no question, there's no doubt that there is a lot of corruption, a lot of malfeasance, a lot of incompetence, a lot of cruelty, a lot of problems. And yet, it is interesting to notice that on top of recent elections in Canada and Australia, where in some measure, probably pretty large measure, both those countries opted to choose a path opposite to what they were initially moving toward, meaning they were moving right, and instead they went in a more liberal direction because of what is happening in the US. And now we notice in Europe, in Romania, same thing. And there are strong indications in Serbia as well. So we're seeing more and more of this, and this is what I often try to remind people of. You can speculate all you like about where things are going, but the key indicator is always who is being elected, where, but especially what type of person is being elected. This is also true in the US itself. You've seen recent elections in places where you would normally elect a Republican, instead a Democrat is being elected, even though separately you notice polling that tells you that public opinion is not behind the Democrats, but when they go to choose, they choose the Democrat. And so for me, this is very encouraging. The counterpoint can be, sure, but in the meantime, we have this crew of people running our country, and they are intent on doing all kinds of things that are, frankly, often illegal, dangerous, at minimum, highly problematic. True. This is true. And there's no way around that other than to be as vigilant, as present to it as possible, meaning without immersing oneself so much in the news that it destabilizes our energy and can make us feel anything from despondent to deeply depressed, but certainly enough to know what is going on so we can act in our own best interest to protect ourselves. That's true. And one great example of this is the absolute crank that we have running our health services, RFK, because he just isn't the right person for the job, and this can connect us during this administration, now during this period, to potential dangers. Some would be possibly going into future years, but some could be immediate. If you are, paying less inspectors, let's say, on the government level to inspect food, then there is a greater likelihood that there might be a problem with the food and so on. So we have to be very watchful. There's no question. By the way, when it comes to that, to RFK, if I didn't know already, please check the link that I'm putting in the description of this video. You'll see it in there. It's a link to a podcast episode by Malcolm Gladwell, who is someone that I respect. I think he has his head properly screwed on his shoulders, which RFK does not. And he explains in there something about RFK that is deeply disturbing, something that came up in which he heard RFK say something about his understanding of how health works, which is, of course, completely incorrect and can lead you into some really, really serious problems. Let's just say that. However, back to the astrology. Saturn is about to enter Aries. This happens this weekend. Saturday in the US, Sunday if you're living in Europe, but the weekend Saturn enters Aries, where it'll be until the fall, October basically, whereupon it'll come back into Pisces. Now, you've heard me say in prior videos that this is the back and forth moving of planets, and it correlates with the idea that if you're looking for the effect of Trump's tariffs, which he implemented in April on his own Saturn, big mistake, and yet it takes time for the effect to be felt, and the likely pattern is that it shows up later in the year. In the meantime, in the summer though, being in Aries is not particularly helpful to him either. And of course, I have to also mention that Saturn enters Aries not exactly at the same time, because it's a little bit before Jupiter switches signs into Cancer. That happens first week of next month, or a little after, somewhere in there at the beginning of the month. And so, but roughly speaking, Saturn at Aries, Jupiter in Cancer, that's what we get through the bulk of the summer. And Jupiter in Cancer means for this president his 12th house, and the inclination to do what the 12th house inclines a person to do, which if he were anything from normal to a good citizen, and he's not, he is highly abnormal and he's a really bad citizen. He does the low end of that house, he does the low end of everything. He's like Mr. Corrupt. And so his inclination is to expand activities in that area, and such activities are, lawless activities. That's what they are. Now, of course, again, as I say, a normal person there would be encouraged to deepen their service to society. The 12th is the most compassionate, service-oriented house if you're normal. But the way you understand that house is it's a sequestration house, and so high-end monasteries, but also prisons. Which way are you playing? Well, it's pretty clear what this guy does. So we have to be really attentive to what he's trying to do. And here's where, get cause for optimism. Even though people often complain about the media in this country, everything we know is from the media. The media is really robust, and it is very difficult to suppress it. Of course he's trying different things, he sues, whatever, CBS, he's doing a few things, but it's like playing whack-a-mole. There are just way, way too many points to control, and so you will hear about it, you'll know what is going on. The voters are discovering what is going on. All of this is not good for upcoming elections. It just isn't, plain and simple. It's there for us to see. And when you couple the continuous stream of attempted malfeasance, corruption, etc., with the fact that now this guy, he was saying in the election cycle, I'm going to bring prices down on day one. Now he has not only no interest in that, he's saying Walmart, for example, they should just eat the tariffs, as he puts it. So of course, it's pretty funny since he used to say the tariffs were paid, they're actually paid by foreign countries. It makes us a lot of money. Now, he's openly admitting in his truth antisocial thingy, he's saying, no, Walmart should just eat the tariffs because they make plenty of money, which of course they won't. No company will take all the cost onto themselves. They'll pass it on to consumers. And so there will be a perception, a pretty obvious perception, that things cost more. And this is how you set up the playing field so that voters vote against you. Separately, as I'm sure you know, they're on the verge of passing this so-called big, beautiful bill, which is code for big breaks, big tax breaks for the richest among us. And everyone else either gets very little or nothing or gets totally stiffed, right? Especially when you take away people's Medicaid, which is why there are plenty of Republicans as well arguing that that's a bad idea. And so it'll be hard for them to get it through, but in the end, these people will always go in this direction. And so we go into the end of the year with this kind of thing cemented in people's minds, that they cater to their own crowd, the people that are greedy and want to be as rich as possible, and they're taking away from people that have the least. It's not a good plan, but as is true in so many things in life, these things take time to develop. But to me, it's encouraging despite the dangers, because I look at it as, where is this headed next? And especially when I see that Saturn in Aries, in the chart of the orange degenerate, puts it in his primary legal house, which is why you are seeing all kinds of energy being emitted. I'm going to use that terminology from the Supreme Court. Starting to see, in many of these cases, a 7-2 split against him because it's so brazen what he's trying to do. Saturn being in that sign alone, that's what I use the whole sign system, meaning Aries is his ninth sign. That's where it happens on that basis. Of course, it'll be worse next year in that Saturn comes back into Pisces this year, spend some time there until the spring of 2026. So then it's in the previous house, which is no help to him either, because that puts it back where it was when he implemented the tariffs. Hence, the results of that, which are almost certain to be very negative for him. But then in Aries, starting in the spring of 26, goes deeper into the sign. Well, that's worse, because then it starts to find his cardinal planets, the ones in his chart that are in Aries, one of them, another one is in Cancer, and another one is in Libra. Saturn starts to trigger those, and those triggers enhance the problem for him. And they enhance it in the sense that the judicial system resists, the law resists. And of course, you would expect that it would, because that's how this government was set up by the founders. And that way they were really brilliant. They understood the possibility that someone like Trump could emerge. I mean, Nixon was a little bit like this, but this is extreme Nixonian behavior, much more autocratic, dictatorial, and incredibly corrupt, right? So the whole idea is to set up a system where you have checks and balances, in part because those branches have their own interest. They want to have power, they want to be strong, and so the judges defend their interests. But it's hard to believe that I'm saying, I think Coney Barrett especially, probably the most, and secondarily Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are more honest than someone like Trump as well. They see the big picture better. And so they fight back. Separately, and this is something this man, this clown, is always getting himself into, and you see this through the Saturn as well. In his previous term, the Saturn eventually found him and crushed him, starting in 18, because the first thing that happened in 18 was that big electoral loss. that put the Democrats in power and began a cycle of many problems for him. And then it culminated in the pandemic with Saturn still in Capricorn, where his incompetence was fully revealed to the world, which is the main reason he lost that election. So then in between, Saturn leaves Capricorn. During the Biden years, we get Saturn in Aquarius and Pisces. Now it's going into Aries. And Aries is, for him, like Saturn in Capricorn, in the cardinal part of the chart, very complicated. And one of the things it does is Saturn links to his, the people, his underlings, the people that are his supporters. But with Saturn moving into Aries, aside from the justice system resisting him continuously, his own supporters start to pull away, which they did with Saturn in Capricorn. So the supporters are the sixth house. Saturn rules the sixth house. Now it's traveling in a different sign, but it's making a challenging pattern. So therefore, you're going to see more and more betrayals. Some of them are totally logical, because if you're in Congress, sure, you follow along with the president at first for a while, but there comes a point where you'll realize there's a fork in the road. If I keep doing this, I'm going to lose my job. So I can't. I have to go against him, no matter what he says. And so you can expect that as well. And all of this is great news from the perspective of being more optimistic, because that's an election year. It's when people actually vote. But even so, this does not necessarily mean that anything bigger than that happens. I mean, it'd be great if some great event took place that completely upended the entire situation, of course. And I suppose we could say, as long as Uranus is in the late degrees of Taurus, where it is in one way or another until next year, next spring, whereupon it'll enter Gemini and be there for about 7 years. But while it's in those late degrees, it does connect to the American moon in its late Aquarius position. And Uranus is famous for the sudden bolt of lightning, the unexpected event, a big, big change. So something could happen. But I'm basically preparing myself for the fact that the more likely outcome is that we have to go election by election and trust in the process and look for all the markers that tell us that the system is holding up. And despite, the dangers, and I know they're there, there's no question. I mentioned RFK, and there are plenty of others. I'm sure you can make a list and name them yourself. Even so, on balance, I remain optimistic that we can get through this. And I think that's the main point.